your hair out thinking, what am I going to do with these patients? What am I going to do? So you can take it.
No, it was very difficult, a very challenging time to practice medicine because people were dying quickly and dying very painful deaths, and these were relatively young people. These were not people that we were used to seeing dying in large numbers in hospitals. So it was very stressful, very difficult. And this continued well into the mid-90s. It's important to remember the breakthrough treatments really didn't become available until the mid-1990s. Was
it like black and white?
Well, we even talked about the Lazarus syndrome, that people actually who were near death, actually, several of those people, and many people now are living fairly healthy, productive lives. So, yeah, it was a difference of black or white. For a lot of people, I have to say, one thing I do want to mention, though, in spite of all of our research efforts, there are still people dying every day of HIV/AIDS in the United States. So a lot of that is due to a lack of an adequate health care system, lack of resources, mental health, substance abuse issues. But even with the best care, not everyone does well with HIV/AIDS, and I think that's important to keep in mind, and that's why we continue to do research and continue need to do research.
People were in denial. People were living in fear back then, and anybody who was infected, they didn't tell anybody. They either left town or they just faded out. Just kept to themselves. Because my best friend, his lover died over the summer, and he told everybody his lover had died from cancer. And he didn't tell anybody that he was HIV positive because he would have been, back then people were, out of fear, they turned their backs. Then, we finally saw the light came around, became embracive, supportive, and helping people, got involved with me, ACT UP Chicago, to help people get their benefits, because they couldn't work. So.
And Dennis?
Yeah, during the 80s, it was pretty nightmarish for my experience was pretty nightmarish. I lived in Houston until 1990 when I moved to the Seattle area, and AIDS had hit Houston much harder than it had here at that point. And, well, for instance, in '85 when the test first became available, I started insisting that Shane and I go get tested to kind of set an example for our friends, because most of our friends were not wanting to get tested because they didn't want to know, because there was no cure. And there was so much fear. If you rented a place, you didn't want to tell your landlord. You could get kicked out for no other reason. You didn't want to tell your boss for sure, or any of your coworkers. It was just, there was a lot of fear surrounding it. And of course, we were playing caregiver to our friends who were sick and dying at the time, and so we had that experience was going on at the same time, and it really was like a living nightmare. But, fortunately, things have changed for most people since then, but there's still a fair number of people that either can't tolerate the side effects that the meds produce in their specific bodies, because everybody's body is unique. And so what works well for me might not work quite the same for the person sitting next to me, and vice versa. So, yeah, things were tough back in the 80s and through the mid-90s.
Well, here's actually a question that was on my list, and I I do have a list, but with what has been said about the disease from back in the 80s to present, how has the understanding of this disease changed since then?
Well, for the longest time, people were saying that AIDS wasn't a problem anymore, which is the reason that people started going out having unprotected sex. And that as long as you get on the cocktail, you'll live longer. But the side effects alone, you get sick from those. You get nausea, fatigue, neuropathy, lipodystrophy, diarrhea. You get all that going on. And people just not playing it safe anymore.
But I think that it's worth it, though, to stay on a regimen as long as the regimen is working. Wouldn't you say so?
Yes.
Yeah, I think we continue to develop newer drugs, less toxic drugs. We now have, for people newly diagnosed today, the most common regimen we start them on is 1 pill once a day, which contains 3 drugs in 1 pill, compared to people taking, 8, 10, 12 pills 3 times a day. And the newer drugs, we're seeing fewer problems with things like neuropathy and lipodystrophy. We're seeing fewer problems with that with the newer drugs. But I think that we can't emphasize enough there's still a tremendous amount of stigma and discrimination around HIV. And people still deal with that. It's still a major issue for people to deal with.
You know, your answer really, it flows perfect with the next question on the list. Absolute perfect. Couldn't have been any better. In the 80s, medication for HIV and AIDS patients were far and few in between, as we all know. Do you believe that the lack of medication back then could have been prevented as a researcher?
Well, I think there was a lot of effort that went into research. I think there were a certain amount of biological obstacles that had to be overcome in terms of our understanding of how HIV caused disease, what we call pathogenesis. And there are still AIDS deniers out there. Just read the newspaper headlines out of South Africa last week about the president of South Africa and his continued views about that. So it's still, there needed to be a certain amount of biologic information obtained and understanding, which came in retrospect relatively rapidly for people living through the epidemic in 1980, and the people who died, it clearly wasn't rapid enough. But I do think that the development, I'm not sure in retrospect if more money would have done it. Certainly leadership from President Reagan, I think it was 1987, 7 years into his term before he first spoke about it. There could have been much better federal leadership. And Nevin talked about the work at ACT UP Chicago and ACT UP New York, and people really demanded and insisted that that research and money came. And had more come, maybe it would have made a difference early on. It's hard to know in retrospect.
Do you guys feel that it would have?
Yes.
I possibly would have. It's hard to say. Sometimes if you can throw too much money at a problem, and it can end up setting you back. But I think at least some more money would have been helpful back then. I think a lot of what's going on today, it's just we need to keep people aware that it's still a problem. And you know, that's something people were more aware of it back then because there really were no effective treatments. And a lot of people today think that, well, it's no big deal. It's like diabetes or something. And so they're started up their careless behavior again.
I remember watching a TV show. Actually, it was a movie, and it hasn't been that long ago, but it dealt with HIV and AIDS. And one patient was shown, or at least the actor was shown, laying in the bed, and you could just imagine that being a real live person in a real life situation, and I think too often that it is, or at least was. But this person, you know, the doctors were shaking their head, the nurses were, you know, getting ready just to, you know, pull the plug on the whole thing, just to make the person just as comfortable as they can in their last hour of life. And I think that the dogma about HIV and AIDS, much less than its care, still focuses back like, well, that's the gay disease, or that's only for the gay cancer. You know, only gay people can get it. But statistics show that heterosexuals get it just the same, do they not?
Yes, they do. Right? And their numbers are rising too, as well. As Hispanic women and Asian women. It's an epidemic going throughout all the ethnic communities.
What would you guys say to them, to people that are, you know, maybe they know that they're having unsafe sex, or maybe that they know or are really thinking about, you know, having a relationship with somebody, maybe their first time, and, you know, thinking, you know, I'm really oblivious to HIV and AIDS. What would you tell them?
I write in my column about unsafe, risky behavior, and I always say, have your meat wrapped.
Right.
Wrap that meat.
Right.
Yeah. That's a good way to put it.
Yes. Because, you know, okay, now they got, somebody is going around through the grapevine. The thing is a serotyping. You find somebody with your, the same strand of virus that you do, and you can have unsafe sex. That is suicidal. I'm CR5. If I have unsafe sex, I can wipe out Tokyo. I could. But I am the perfect candidate for safe and safer sex because I don't have sex. I haven't had sex in 10 years. Moses can't part these flags.
I love your humor. You know, I love your humor. I think it's marvelous.